When we read the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, which we're about to do, we feel a complex set of emotions. Strikingly, the story centers on the experience of Hagar, an Egyptian maidservant. Hagar's name may come from the word ger, meaning stranger, suggesting her marginal status in the household of Abraham and Sarah. But a midrash in Genesis Rabbah suggests that her name derives from the word Hagar, meaning reward. The midrash tells us that despite her humble station, Hagar was actually an Egyptian princess. After Sarai was mistakenly taken captive in Pharaoh's palace, back in Genesis chapter 12, Pharaoh handed over his daughter Hagar to Sarai as a maidservant, saying, "My daughter is your compensation for my having wronged you. Here is your reward, ha'agrich." Hagar's name suggests the double dimensions of her identity. She's a person of high status, forced into a subservient role. Valued and respected in her native land, she's now disparaged and rejected, treated as an alien by her new masters. We know from chapter 16 that there are tensions between the two women in the household. Hagar lords it over Sarah when she becomes pregnant. Sarah, older and childless, torments Hagar out of jealousy. In today's parsha, after Sarah has miraculously given birth to Isaac, the crisis arrives. Sarah turns on Hagar and her child Ishmael, viewing this new son as a threat to the hopes she carries for her own child. She demands that Abraham expel them from the home. "Cast out that slave woman and her son," she says, "for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham is clearly torn about what to do, but God reassures him, saying, "Do not be distressed about the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says. Happy wife, happy life." It seems clear that God has another plan for Hagar and for Ishmael as well, and that plan soon becomes clear. I'm always struck when reading this story and the midrash about Hagar by the disparity between Hagar's true identity and the way she's perceived by others. Sarah and Abraham see her as that slave woman, and that's how they refer to her. The text never records them using her name. Sarah, it seems, does not even see Hagar as a human being like herself. If she did, could she have expelled this young woman and her child so callously into the wilderness, where they're almost certain to die? Yet the midrash accords royal status to this woman. And as the story progresses, we find that God, too, perceives her as a person of value. After Hagar is expelled, she nearly loses hope. Wandering parched and exhausted in the desert, she withdraws from Ishmael so she will not have to see him die. Feeling utterly alone, she bursts into tears. But then, God does something remarkable. Witnessing her despair, hearing the cry of this desperate mother and child, God lifts Hagar up in a remarkable way, addressing her directly, encouraging her, and promising her that her child will survive and will grow into a great nation. The women's commentary on the Torah notes that Hagar receives a divine blessing parallel to that of the patriarchs. She's the only woman in the Torah to be informed directly that her descendants will be numerous. Hagar is the only woman whose experience is enshrined in a place name. Such a privilege for the marginalized slave woman, the outsider, the immigrant, is striking. The narrative views Hagar with sympathy and as having value. This is the first report of a personal encounter between an individual woman and a divine being since Genesis 3, when God speaks to Eve. And it's remarkable that our high holiday reading for today centers on a woman at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, a household slave servant, a foreigner, a despised other. Why did our sages want us to read this story, to make this woman the focus of our attention on this sacred day? Perhaps to remind us to look more closely at people we often ignore, those in the background, outside the circle of privilege, those on the margins, rejected and despised. This year, I'm especially thinking of one group that has been cast out into the American wilderness. In this country, an estimated 1.6 million people aged 13 and older identify as transgender. During the past year, 49 states have introduced an onslaught of legislative attacks on this group, which represents a tiny minority, less than 1% of our population. In the last year, a staggering 566 bills sought to block trans people from receiving basic health care, education, legal recognition, and the right to publicly exist. 83 of these bills have passed into law. They include attacks on gender-affirming health care for youth and adults, restrictions on bathroom use, bans on drag performances, and the protection of so-called parental rights, encouraging parents to report and ban books which discuss gender fluidity or choice of gender pronouns, and require that both a guardian and teacher approve of a student's preferred pronouns. It's devastating and dangerous that politicians are denying medical care, most of which is non-surgical, and promoted by every leading medical organization to trans Americans. Treatment leads to better mental health outcomes, most notably for lower rates of depression. These legislative attacks treat trans people as outsiders and strangers in this country, denying them basic rights, preventing them from expressing their true identity and feeling at home in their body. Our tradition reminds us on this sacred day to see the humanity in every person and to pay special attention to those who are vulnerable. It warns us against casting those we perceive as different into a wilderness of indifference and hate, depriving them of the dignity and respect that they deserve. It calls us to see what is happening, to hear the cries of the desperate, and to speak out, offering support and protection. May we view the world as God does, recognizing each individual, especially the Hagars in our homes and communities, as a blessing and a treasured gift. May we lift up the one who has been cast out. May we stand with the trans folks here in the Bethel community and across the country. May we fight together for their dignity and basic human rights. May we know that they are honored and valued in our eyes and in the eyes of God. Amen.